on a topic that is already changing the way we work, agentic AI. All about using low or no code AI to do the grunt work so you can focus on the big ideas. That is being presented by the CFA Institute at 11. But up next, and in the same vein, our next session is with the LSEG Group Head of Analytics and AI, Emily Prince, all looking at how trusted financial data empowers safe and accurate AI. So this is going to be moderated by Melissa Martani. So let's invite Melissa onto the stage alongside Emily Prince.
Good morning, everyone. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Emily, whose job is literally at the intersection of finance and AI. Emily, LSEG provides over 200 billion daily data updates, and essentially it's your job to make sure that this data is AI ready. What does this actually mean? What is AI ready data? How is it different to the traditional market feeds?
So it's a hugely, hugely important question. So we often think about AI, and sometimes we think about the words like trust come up quite quickly in terms of, but to what extent can you really have confidence in AI? For me, and certainly the role that I play and LSEG plays, a lot of that is to do with making sure that our customers can access what we would regard as trusted data. And there's a few tenets of what we regard as trusted. Firstly, we have to make sure that we can really understand what the origination of that data is and attest to the quality of it. Quality absolutely is a hallmark of that trust. The second thing is there's actually a really interesting science around how you present data together in a way that actually brings broader context into the question that someone was asking as part of something like a chat experience. And we'll talk about things like semantics and ontology and those type of things in that context. But what it gives is the ability for you to ask multi-layered questions and still retain the robustness and quality of that answer. Alongside that also sits things like citations, which I mentioned part of that quality piece. The third piece, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, is it doesn't mean just because something exists that is accessible. And so there's things like Model Context Protocol or MCP, which you might have heard about. For those who haven't, really think about this as a way for the model to be able to discover and use, with the right controls in place, underlying data in the context of that AI experience. Hugely, hugely important. There are many people who maybe don't feel particularly comfortable with random data being used and surfaced to make critical decisions. Not many people are, certainly in financial services. So making sure that you have the right controls, but accessibility into that data is what we regard as truly AI ready, but also hallmark trusted as well.
So for people in this room who aren't very tech savvy, so in its simplest form, this MCP is like a model context protocol that essentially is allowing AI assistants to connect with LSEG's verified data.
Yeah.
So what processes do you have in place to ensure the standards of accuracy and everything that these AI assistants can connect to?
Yeah, so this did not start 3 years ago when ChatGPT was announced. It started more than 3 decades ago. This is a long journey, and it's decades worth of quality data and actually expertise and feedback that goes into what do our customers expect in terms of quality, how deep do they want that data, how much metadata they want associated, which gives them that confidence in the quality of that data to be then surfaced.
Okay, so this is what LSEG's doing. But just so I can understand, explain to me from a customer perspective, what does this mean like for their workflows? So I know you've had recent partnerships with Microsoft, you've had recent partnerships with Databricks. What does this mean for your customers?
So I actually see this as a real step change. This is the point where you see this democratization, where anyone with a question, you don't need to be able to code, you don't need to be able to speak English, but anyone has the access and the ability to curate ideas, and now with that trusted data. So that data is now available with MCP, and actually what we've been doing over the last few weeks is actually establishing connection with multiple different agentic platforms. So Databricks Genie, Snowflake Cortex, Microsoft Copilot Studio, Anthropic Claude, and today, OpenAI. Now, it's a massive step change in making sure that anyone within these environments or using the tools from these providers is not only able to get the incredible power of AI, but also with the trust of the underlying data. So it is a true step change, and the fact that you can, as an end individual, build these agents without having to have a degree in engineering is incredible liberation in terms of ideas.
So in practical terms, so this partnership today with OpenAI, this means that anybody here sitting in the audience can go to ChatGPT and connect to LSEG's data. Okay, so this is fascinating because the ease and efficiency is clear. But, I mean, it's also very scary because there's huge risks associated, right? Trust, compliance, IP. I just want to run through those. So first of all, with trust, where does LSEG draw the line with human oversight and automation when you're getting this data ready? Because it only takes one tiny little thing to be wrong for there to be huge ramifications.
So it's an incredibly important question. So when I think about AI, and I spend a lot of time also working with clients around the world thinking about what are the really good use cases for AI, and it starts there. AI, I'll be the first to say it, I'm responsible for AI at LSEG, is not the answer to all problems. And I think as soon as we accept that and say, actually, there are a lot of deterministic processes where we're actually very comfortable with the way that we solve that problem today, and actually AI introduces a level of risk that isn't commensurate with the benefits, then we can actually start to navigate and say, well, this is where we can get the best uplift and benefit from AI. Now, there are many good kind of examples across the industry in terms of where people are really effectively getting the benefit of AI, but they're also protecting the way that they solve for some of those deterministic processes that they need to be able to fully repeat and explain. And I see this more and more becoming a pattern across the industry. Now, alongside that clear understanding in terms of where to apply AI, which problem to solve, to put it differently, it also comes with two other things. One is LSEG has spent a lot of time on what we call RAY, or Responsible AI Principles. And this really looks at how do we put those underlying safeguards in place. And it's not necessarily completely reinventing the wheel because we already had a lot of pre-existing standards from an industry standpoint which we were able to evolve, and other elements that are new and really recognize some of the nuances of AI itself. The third thing that we're very focused on is how do we make sure that our end users have the right training? So as an end user, how do you really understand how to interact with AI, what to expect from it, how to challenge it, and how to critique it? And this is where the education has to go hand in hand. We can think about enablement, but it has to be hand in hand with that level of education and understanding on how to apply it as well.
So, again, this sounds amazing, but from a compliance point of view, if one of your clients, customers, or somebody in this room is using OpenAI to access your data and making a financial decision off the back of it, if something goes wrong, is that person to blame? Is OpenAI to blame? Or is it fundamentally you with the data set that you're providing?
So another great question. So there's a little bit of nuance to this, and this actually speaks very much to what problem someone is actually trying to solve for. So there are what you'll call closed experiences, where actually it's a complete experience that someone is providing, and then there's other instances where a customer is going to be orchestrating, and we will connect our data directly into those experiences. Now, that isn't actually, you can strip away AI at this point and say that's actually how the industry has always worked, and that's true. So that perception in terms of control has always been a decision that the industry and industries have made in terms of what problem they're solving, how much control, proprietary control they want in that stack, and how they want to build. Then we can layer in AI and say the only thing that really changed there was arguably that it's so new. We're learning how it works, and we need to put in the safeguards in terms of the operation and controls that go with it. What I've personally been so impressed with so many of the clients that I've been working with is they've been so swift in terms of establishing that governance framework, really understanding which parts of their business they're comfortable using AI, which parts they're frankly not yet, which data sets they're comfortable using, which they're not, and actually things like the work we're doing at LSEG around making our data available with those governance standards actually gives them much more confidence in being able to safely use AI. So it's a balance, it's an evolution, it's a training. I think there's many kind of cycles to go in terms of people really understanding how to play it. And what I see at the moment is, frankly, a lot of people that are putting AI into existing workflows rather than actually recognizing that they could have re-established how the workflow worked in the first place. It's that old adage of, what was the first thing you did when you got Google Maps? You looked up your own house. And we see the same phenomenon happening with AI, where the first thing that people are doing is automating the thing they were already doing, rather than actually exploring another way to solve the problem entirely.
Well, I do want to take some audience questions. I can see them coming in. And if you have questions, please do send them. So how do you get bad data out once it's in a database that Gen AI can access?
Yeah, so this is a really important question. There's two places that data is really relevant from an AI perspective. One is at the point of training, which is where you hear a lot of news in the industry. And the other is at the point that you're asking your question, so prompt. Those are two different places that we're using data. Now, in the first instance, that training is where you'll hear a lot of what the foundational model providers talking about their training data sets. LSEG does not do that training, and the data is not used in that context. The second piece is much more akin to how we interact with data today, which is how accurate is the underlying data. It's what we just talked about. How accurate is the underlying data? If there's an issue with the data, how do we then have the right governance and controls in terms of running a correction? But that is truly no different to how it works in a standard ETL today.
You know, the analogy you gave about Google Maps is really interesting, because to me, one of the first things I think about people like me doing is using ChatGPT, now that we can, to access financial data, but also to see how I could benefit from it, right? But that is a big danger, because then you end up putting your own financial data. How does this, what do you say to people's concerns about IP and privacy?
So it's absolutely something to be very aware of. So really understanding what data you're using, and there isn't a standard to this, so you really have to understand the context in which you're exposing information and how that information can get used. One thing I will say is the whole community has become much more sensitive, much more supportive in terms of the protection around IP, but you still really have to understand the context and the tools that you're using, and then how that data is going to be protected. What is nice is you have a much stronger draw. So one of the things that we all have is, as humans, we have limitations in terms of just how much information we can consume in any one period. We have limited attention spans. And arguably, when you get AI right, you get much more expansive planes of access to data, which can actually inform much better decision-making. Now, that is, of course, predicated on having the underlying trusted data and having that orchestration and knowing that the data you're presenting as part of that is being safely applied.
You know, one of the interesting things about AI at the moment is it's developing much faster than regulation. And LSEG and what you're doing, you are really betting big on building this data infrastructure, if you like, before the industry has regulated it. What do you say to people who say this is putting the cart before the horse? Is that true? Or is it more of a case of if we build it, they will come?
Not at all. So we were on this path in terms of how do we have that gold standard in data before some of the energy in AI over the past 2 years. Data has always been really important to us as a whole industry, as a community, in terms of having the most informed decision-making. Arguably, with AI, it became even more important. So it's less of a change of strategy to us and more a question of how do we make sure we're doing it in the most powerful way from an AI perspective, because that last point I introduced earlier, where I mentioned about accessibility, is extremely important. We want to encourage this really easy, democratized, safe use of AI. But what we don't want you to have to do is build a lot of ETL associated with that, a lot of processes to be able to use that data first. So it's trying to strike that balance between ease and safety at the same time.
And so I've asked you about a lot of the risks, trust, compliance, all the rest of it. But tell me about some of the best use cases you're seeing of how your customers, clients are actually using this.
I have the privilege of seeing some extraordinary things actually at the moment. And yes, you get what you will expect me to say in terms of some of those kind of operational pieces around. I was able to generate that report. I was able to run multiple changes through a report that I was generating, a presentation that I was creating or something of that nature, or through the extraction of something like unstructured data. Those are quite expected types of use cases where we're seeing very good examples in terms of ROI for a lot of different customers. Some of the more emerging types of examples that I'm seeing are actually where people are able to build signals and actually find relationships in data that they didn't expect. It's an interesting thing where with AI we often think about some of the dangers around bias, but it's also true with humans. And actually based on our education, our how tired we feel in a particular day, how creative we feel, that might all inform what information we use when we're trying to build and see different insights. So what's really interesting about this, and I've seen a few great examples from customers, is they're actually starting to see new types of information, which is allowing for them to make much more accountable and better decision-making in real time. Now, when you think about the practical consequences of that, is that it's actually opening up access to financial services to more people, which is an extremely powerful step change where we actually can make sure that more people have access to that trusted information where and when they need it, which allows for the best decision making.
And to that point, another audience question here for people, when and where they need it. How do you address regulatory requirements across geographies when applying AI to financial data?
So I'll speak more from person. I spend a lot of time with the regulators. The regulators have been actually extraordinary in terms of really trying to encourage the kind of safe, scaled use of AI. So it is very much a partnership in terms of how we think about that. One of the things that I think about, and I serve a lot of global customers and I work with global policymakers, is how do we think about making sure we've got the right sensitivities from a global perspective across different countries, the right openness as well in terms of use of different types of foundational models as part of these stacks, but then also the right accountability for end users. So I see it in multiple layers, geography, one, but I actually see another layer in terms of the types of roles that we have in any given organization. One of the things that I see very commonly is, particularly with larger organizations, they tend to be quite siloed in terms of how they operate. And one of the things what you're seeing with AI is it's starting to bring together communities that aren't used to actually working so closely together because they're actually starting to become dependent on similar components, which is allowing a new form of collaboration and synergies to actually emerge across community. And that's actually one of the more interesting things that is starting to emerge. You see the same trend across industry. If I take financial services has been very focused on optimization within financial services. Arguably now, we're actually starting to see a lot of very interesting innovations that we can learn from other fields, like science, that are actually very relevant into the likes of financial services and beyond. And we have never really explored that in the same magnitude that's happening today.
Final question for you.
Sure.
What is on LSEG's agenda for next year? What are you hoping that we'll be sitting here talking about at Reuters Next 2026?
So my goal for this group is that we have truly fulfilled that ambition, first of all, making sure we've got trusted data in your hands. And you're able to apply that trusted data in the context of your AI ambitions. And different people's AI ambitions looks like different things. For some people, it's a chat interface, and there's variations on that. The thing that I'm really hoping we've really solved for is we've got that fantastic framework around scaled use of agents in a way that actually people can safely adopt and use to be able to do task execution alongside individuals. And I think that can actually be extraordinarily powerful in terms of scaling knowledge and actually access to information for global society, actually.
Well, it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out in the next year.
It'll be a busy year.
Definitely. Well, thank you very much, Emily. I know that there were some questions that we didn't get to, but Emily will be around. So find her in the break, and I'm sure she can answer all of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Right, it is break time. So very quickly, I want to let you know this afternoon we've got Wikipedia founder Jimmy Wales, we've got Sarah Jessica Parker. The Future of News sessions start at 11 at Crossroads Hub 1, and we will be back here at 11 a.m. to kick off. Again, enjoy your coffee. See you then. Bye-bye.